Welcome back to the Scale Forward podcast. Today, I'm joined by Danny Maloney, the CEO of Tailwind. If you've spent any time around content scheduling with Pinterest, you've probably known about Tailwind for some time now. It's one of the original Pinterest tools, but over the years, Tailwind has evolved into a full suite marketing engine that helps creators and small businesses scale. Danny, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you here and talk about Tailwind today. For those who might not be familiar, can you walk us all the way back to the beginning? How was Tailwind started? What sparked the idea?
Yeah, it was one of those stories of building the tool that we needed. So my co-founder, Alex, and I were building something completely different. It was a website in the wedding space. And the idea behind it was that brides would see pictures from other people's weddings, pick out the things they liked, and then we would help them plan how to actually execute their vision. And then this little site called Pinterest started taking off at the time. It was less than 1 million users back then, and our content went viral. So we really began building the early Pinterest-focused marketing functionality that we had for just our own use in order to figure out what content people were interested in and how we could gear our website to deliver the type of content they wanted. And then, you fast forward a few months and we started to realize that what we had built for ourselves actually had a lot of potential to help other businesses as well. And frankly, it was more interesting to us than the business we were building in the wedding space. So one day we were at a coffee shop and just made the decision, hey, we're going to go test if people would actually buy this. And within a week, we actually had more paying customers signed up than we had in over 18 months of working on the bridal business. So that was our sign, I think, that there was an opportunity there. It was something we felt ourselves. And I guess you could just say the momentum built from there and we followed the feedback. But that was really the spark initially, was solving our own need.
The classic story of so many SaaS out there. How did you go from 0 to 1? It's one thing to have the idea. You had a partner at the time. What's the overview of the execution steps that you went through?
Wow, great question. So it was definitely a story of delivering a service by hand before we actually had the software tool. We started selling the vision of what we thought it would be. We didn't really know exactly what it would be, but we knew it had something to do with growing through Pinterest and other visual networks at the time. And initially, we actually leaned into analytics. So as we had customers coming on, what would happen was one day a week, I would sit in front of my computer in my apartment and build out analytics dashboards for those customers based on the data that we were gathering on their behalf. So there was no actual dashboard to log into at that time. There was no other functional toolkit. It was really just a data service initially. And then we began building the prototype in the background and ended up taking months, frankly, to get to the point where we had a functional prototype. Today, I'd like to think it would be a lot faster because of the tools that now exist to stand up SaaS prototypes so much more easily. But back then, it wasn't quite as easy.
Yeah.
That was where we got the start. And then honestly, it was a long journey until it really felt like a SaaS business. It probably happened over the span of about 1.5 to 2 years.
Wow. Okay. I mean, yeah, today you could do it in about one to 2 hours, with AI.
You could at least have
I'm not trying to
prototype.
You could have a very basic MVP so quickly today. At least you watch any YouTube video about building a SaaS with AI. That's the story they portray anyway.
Yeah, well, and if you go back then, I mean, there definitely were no code builders. There was no AI vibe coding. Pinterest didn't even have a public API yet, right? It was a small enough company itself where they didn't actually get to the point of having a public API and a partner program until years later. And so even getting to the data was difficult, and you didn't have the types of scaled services for data scraping and so forth that you could just turn on overnight. So that was part of why it took so long. The other part was that, frankly, my co-founder and I, neither one of us were ever full-time software engineers before that, right? And so,
okay,
he dove in more. We both had some engineering background, but he dove in more to figuring out how to stand up the prototype. It didn't really start moving quickly until we got to the point where we could bring on a couple of full-time team members who were the very first hires into the company. And then it began moving a lot faster. But what we were able to get going early on was pretty basic.
Right. And just out of curiosity, what What is your background?
Sure. So I studied engineering and business in school. So I was in a joint degree program, was always fascinated by the intersection of the two. And so I had started a company when I was in college and ran that for about 3 years as my
What was
first
it?
entrepreneurial venture. It was an e-commerce company. So
Okay.
I was really into collectibles, like collectible trading cards and things like that. And so basically, I was just tracking prices across different platforms on the web and trying to buy low, sell high on collectibles where there was enough data to predict what the market price should be. And it actually, it grew to a decent scale for a business being run by a college student out of their dorm. But I think one of the big lessons for me was at 22 years old, I had no idea how to really scale it. And so that was why I ultimately exited that business and then went to go work full time. I thought it would be 2 years maybe working at larger companies. It turned into more like a decade. But that's a different part of the story. But yeah, I got lucky to work on some really cool projects and fell in love with some of the companies I was working for back then and decided to stay longer. But eventually did make my way back to the entrepreneurial path.
That's fair enough. Honestly, that's something that today that I think is missing is patience. We live in a world of where I just want it now, and I want my business up and running, making a million ARR in 45 days. Let's do it. But patience is sometimes the best thing because you're not necessarily onto the best idea when you first start. Danny, when you were making the transition or the pivots or the reinvention of the tool, can you remember what some of the hard decisions were that you had to make, either product wise or team wise?
Yeah, there were a few big ones. Some were easy, some were hard, even if they were big decisions. So one of the easier ones early, I mentioned we started out going on the analytics path. And the feedback that we began getting pretty quickly from customers was, this is nice. I want the data, but what I really want are workflow tools that'll help me schedule and publish content more easily, right? That was the big need at the time. And so that was a pretty big pivot for us. We made that decision back in maybe like the 2014 range and had to start rebuilding large chunks of the product. Thankfully, by then we had a small team and it wasn't just us cranking away at a prototype. There were much better developers on the team at that point to engineer it. But it was that decision that really kicked off our first hypergrowth phase in 2015 once it launched. And so we had a really nice growth clip there from 2015 till about 2019. And then came the harder second pivot choice, where we began to realize that, a couple of things. One, that social media scheduling and publishing space generally just felt like it was getting saturated, right? There were a lot of players who had decent scale, a couple who had great scale, and then a whole bunch of startups constantly entering into the space and churning out, in many cases, pretty quickly. But there were always a lot of brands and a lot of noise there. The other piece that we began hearing was that scheduling and publishing, because there were so many options, wasn't really the hard part anymore. It was content creation. And we knew that content creation was going to be a much more difficult space to play in at the time. And honestly, it even still is today with AI. But that was, again, where the market was pulling us. And so I think that's where we had a harder decision to make, but began pivoting towards content creation as a key value proposition of what we brought to our users, where then the scheduling and publishing is connected to it and it can all flow into one workflow that's easy to use. But that was a major change at a point where we already had tens of thousands of customers. Our team was growing rapidly. I think, we grew up to about 70 to 80 people. And so we had a sizable, still small business, but sizable team. And changing direction in that way had a lot of implications for customers, for the team, for investors, where ultimately we really knew that we were going to undertake probably a multi-year R&D effort in order to make it happen and get traction. And during that time, we were probably going to see some decay of the historical business that was purely scheduling and publishing. And so that was the harder pivot by far, right? But it was betting on where we believed the market was going. We saw the coming of AI as something that was going to disrupt the status quo in the creative ecosystem. And so that just seemed like the bigger opportunity and the better direction to go. But it was a hard decision.
Yes, for sure. And then obviously that opened up two segments that you now serve, right? Which is creators and business owners.
Yes, exactly. I mean, earlier on, we were serving almost exclusively bloggers on the scheduling and publishing side, in part because we were so strong in the Pinterest marketing space. And that's really who the initial wave of creators on Pinterest were. It was much more bloggers than any other type of creator or than any other type of business. Today, that's diversified more on the platform itself. But as we moved towards making content creation easier and enabling people to publish on multiple platforms, that brought in those other types of companies, right? Because now we were beginning to hit the needs of e-commerce sellers, of people who were course creators and coaches, people who were service providers, like, say, photographers or wedding planners. It was just easier then for them to get started on Tailwind and to get value quickly, especially in cases where they didn't necessarily have a huge library of existing written content to draw upon, right?
Right. So that's going to take a unique approach to marketing. You need a whole bunch of new segments, messaging, offers. How did you go about, or how did the team go about launching the GTM for all these different segments?
A lot of experimentation. I think, one reflection on that, and even going back to the beginning and entering the Pinterest marketing market, every market we've entered, we've learned very quickly that we didn't understand it as well as we thought we did, right? And so whenever you go into any type of new vertical, new category, new GTM effort, I strongly would encourage anyone to be in listening and learning mode at first, because we definitely burned some cash and spent some money we shouldn't have spent over the years because we were too aggressive and a bit too optimistic at certain points in time. And then eventually we learned that lesson and pulled back and said, okay, wait, we need to really understand the needs of this particular new customer segment that we're now serving and how to speak to them and where to speak to them. And so I think over time, it became a more complex marketing engine with more pieces and more goals within it. But that's sort of the nature of what you have to do if you start serving multiple audiences. I will say from a founder perspective, there's a much, much greater degree of complexity once you go that direction in terms of the entire business, not just go to market. And so when people talk about getting off the ground, going from 0 to 1, and it being really important to zero in on a specific customer archetype who is your ideal customer profile, listen to that, right? The more you know the exact audience you're speaking to and the deeper you can get in terms of really understanding them, the faster you're going to make progress. And you can always expand later and learn how to expand later. But if you go too broad, it gets to the point where it's just hard to even keep straight. Well, okay, did this insight come from this type of customer or this type of customer? Where are we hearing the feedback? Who are certain groups louder than others, but don't necessarily reflect the needs of others? You start getting into those types of questions before you're really ready for it.
Right. So go more narrow and deep in the beginning, and then you can start to cast your net wider. Can you remember, you said you burned a lot of cash. Can you remember something that you tried that absolutely flopped and then like the insights learned from that?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, from a burning cash perspective, one of the biggest places where we made a mistake there was on paid advertising. And I think there were really two different flavors of that over time. The first
And
was,
what platform was that on?
it was actually multiple platforms. I mean, we've
okay.
spent on Meta ads, we've spent on TikTok, we've spent on Google, we've done some experimentation with LinkedIn and Twitter back in the day. But we've also had some success with paid advertising. But I think the two mistakes we made, one was when we began to expand beyond Pinterest marketing, and Instagram was the next channel that we added. We got really aggressive about advertising into that Instagram audience very quickly, before we understood it well, before we had a brand name established in that market. And we just burned too much cash there and justified it as, well, this is what it takes to penetrate this market. And in hindsight, I'm not sure that actually was true, right? I think we could have taken a more organic approach, which would have been maybe a little bit slower at first, but would have built better momentum before turning to paid ads. And then it's better off if you're using paid ads as the accelerant on top of that versus trying to use that as the tip of the spear to penetrate. So that was one mistake. I think the second mistake, which was related but a little bit different, was going too broad on the top of funnel side of paid marketing before we had really good strategies and techniques to actually bring people down the funnel. Because what we learned going through that process was in our initial market in Pinterest marketing, where we're still strongest to this day, we benefited from having really, really tight product market fit. And as a result of that, a lot of our growth came through word of mouth, and a lot of people were actually entering our funnel pretty deep into the funnel already. which means we didn't have to do the work as much of warming up cold audience and learning how to make them warm and then ultimately driving to purchase. In a new market, that wasn't the case anymore. And so again, probably burned a lot more cash than we should have on top of funnel ad spend, which, in hindsight would go back and definitely do that differently. Today, though, our paid ads that we are running are quite efficient for us, but it's a much more refined strategy at this point that I think reflects better understanding of our strengths and weaknesses as a business and also our customers' needs.
Patience.
Patience is a virtue. It is very much a virtue.
That's some really, really good insights there. Thanks for that. I think some really solid advice there. Today, though, what's the biggest levers that you're pulling that are driving the biggest growth? I mean, you mentioned word of mouth. What are some of these growth loops or funnels that are working best for you?
Yeah, what's interesting is after learning those lessons that we went through, during that somewhat expensive period of trying to push the growth too fast, what we ultimately did was retreated a little bit into our product-led growth origins, right? I mean, that was where we really got our start. That was how we built strength of product market fit. And it just leads to a significantly greater efficiency in the business when you're delivering what people need to the people who need it. You know how to reach them, you know how to speak to them. And so there are a number of strategies and channels that ultimately play into this. But the biggest shift for us over the last year was saying, okay, we're going to refocus on where we are strongest and where we are most efficient. And we're going to drive that as far as we possibly can in growing the business. And that has really paid dividends in itself. So with that, part of what we've refocused on as well is really lower cost marketing channels. So going back to our roots of really focusing on organic traffic, focusing a bit more on content marketing. There are some new angles there where I'd say we're more in learning mode, right? We've never been a very strong team in terms of video creation or video production. And that's something that we're looking to learn more about and get more heavily into, just given the state of where the web is today. But that was a major pivot point for us, I think. And so those organic channels, we've also started leaning a bit more back into our affiliate and ambassador community, because we do have a large base of ambassadors and affiliates there. But I think for a while, as we were taking the product in a broader direction, and for many of them away from really where their audience was, it was hard to make the connection of why these new feature launches really matter to them and why they should speak to them. Now that we've refocused on where our area of strength is, that's becoming easier again, and we're seeing that pick up. But it's more those types of channels that are, again, lower cost, higher margin types of channels versus something like paid ads, but they do require a bit more patience to build gradually month over month, as opposed to, you flip up the budget and all of a sudden you've got the spigot flowing the next month, right?
Yeah, facts. I'll leave my affiliate link in the description. I don't have one yet. Okay, super interesting. I mean, you mentioned videos. What you can do with AI now is kind of insane, right? Which is a nice segment. I want to talk about AI because you did mention it. It's one of your focus at the moment. Can you just kind of explain that a little bit more for us and break that down, how Tailwind is thinking about using AI and implementing AI?
Yeah. So for our customers, one of the biggest challenges that they've run into for years is an ever expanding need to create more content with no more hours and no more budget. And so just being able to create content more efficiently has been a big need. And that's where we began leaning into AI, even a bit ahead of the market. I mean, we were already going there by 2020 or so. And I'd say what we saw was maybe the AI early adopter market began opening late 2022. And that was when ChatGPT hit the scene and started making headlines. And all of a sudden, there was this base of people who were excited about trying AI. Whereas before that, it was really kind of a slow slog, even getting people interested in it. Today, it's a totally different story. But what we emphasized was trying to figure out how AI can fit into workflows that work for creators and small businesses in order to help them not only create content, but do it consistently at a higher quality than most of them normally would be able to do, and in a way that improves over time. And so that in itself, I think, took a lot of learning and thought and learning with customers, where a lot of feedback was needed to figure out what does work for them, what doesn't work for them, what is giving too much control to the AI, what is not giving enough leverage, right? And so trying to strike that balance. Where we landed is we want to be a platform that uses AI to make human creativity stronger, right? We don't believe it's about replacing human creativity entirely. We do see a lot of folks out there who are going to too far of an extreme, right? And it's just the content slop farming that's happening at scale now, unfortunately. And frankly, like, that's just bad for society, right? And it's not going to be a sustainable strategy. The platforms are already figuring it out. They're figuring out how to identify that content. Once they identify it, it's pretty easy for them to block it and stop, de-index it, stop surfacing it. So I think that's going to be a shorter term fad. And we've seen that cycle play out in the past, even without AI, right? Like, there were content farms before that grew very quickly and then eventually crashed down. But we're trying to strike that balance of, okay, how do we help our customers take their creativity, turn that into more content that reflects their brand, reflects their voice on a go forward basis, and enable them to build systems around that so they can continuously improve results.
Right. And internally, as a business or as a team, what's been the biggest challenge around AI? Is it technical? Is it figuring out UX, UI? Is it just figuring out what LLM or AI to use?
Yeah, honestly, that piece is pretty trivial in the grand scheme of things, right? The way we really should be architecting systems is that they're almost LLM agnostic, right? Because the LLMs are growing and evolving so rapidly, the best one today might not be the best one next month and might not be the best one next year, right? So you really want to design systems with the architectural flexibility to be agnostic to any given LLM and to function even as a new LLM surfaces to be better for a given use case. I think what's much harder is the human AI interface part of the equation, and dealing with the reality right now, which is in the early adopter stage of the market we're in, you have a lot of different preferences. You have relatively low standardization in terms of how people expect to interact with AI, in terms of how much control they want or don't want to give to the AI, and how much control they want to maintain for themselves. And so that, I think, is really where the difficulty comes in, is for any new feature, any new path you want to explore, figuring out how you make it work for people who are at different ends of that spectrum, right? Who want to give more control to the AI to get more leverage, or who want to maintain more control. And as a result of that, really make sure they're policing their brand voice in their content, but still gain efficiency, right? That's hard. That's hard to do. It's hard to design a UX that works for both of those sets in every situation. And so I'd say that's actually where a lot of the research and a lot of the lessons learned have had to happen from a product perspective.
Right. And how are users responding to it? Are they using it as you expected?
It's a mixed bag, I'd say. I don't know if it's a straight yes or no. I think we've had some features that were used less than anticipated, and we've had some that have taken off faster than anticipated. So just as an example, probably over 2 years ago now, we released a product called Ghostwriter, and this was in like the early days of people getting familiar with LLMs in the first place. And so we really quickly scaled it up to serve 50 different marketing use cases. And it was everything from writing your pin descriptions to helping you draft video scripts to helping you craft emails. It was kind of all over the place, but going in that broad general marketing direction. And I think what surprised us is a lot of the usage was really concentrated ultimately in a very small number of use cases, right? So even though there was this breadth and ability to do so many different things, there was a very strong 80-20 rule happening. And that was a bit unexpected for us because we thought that this was a technology people would latch onto faster to help them with brainstorming, drafting content, drafting copy, and it didn't play out that way. On the other hand, a tool that we just launched called Smart Pin is giving people the ability to take a piece of content and create fresh new pins, new images, new pin titles, descriptions, etc., on an ongoing basis so that they can keep that evergreen content circulating over time. This has been a big focus for Pinterest in recent years, is what they call fresh pins, and not wanting people to just keep keep pinning the same exact piece of content over and over. And I'd say the uptake of that product has been faster than we would have anticipated, right? Really hitting on, I think, a core need. And it's literally one of those charts where you look at number of smart pins being created and published. It's a hockey stick, right? Just continues accelerating since launch. So that's exciting. I mean, that just launched, I believe, publicly last month, or was it maybe in March? I'm losing track of time, but it was rather recently. Um, and so along the way with all different features, I'd say you always end up with that mix. You end up with some that surprise you positively, some that surprise you negatively, some that just confuse you as to what ends up happening. But that's the nature of software development, I think. You're not going to have a perfect batting average ever.
Yeah, it reminds me of SEO and like blog content. There'll always be, the 80-20 of articles that bring in the 80% of the traffic. It also speaks to the importance of testing, right? And not getting stuck on one idea that you think is really good, building it, and then nobody uses it. So it's more like the done is better than perfect in a way. Like get it out there, let people test it, and let them tell you, or let the data show you what they want and what they're going to use, and then lean into that and then develop that. So
yeah,
that's really interesting. Danny, I want to talk about the team just quickly. What's your approach to leadership? Is the team, I imagine, remote?
Yeah, so we are a remote first team at this point. We were actually office centric up until the pandemic. And then because of the pandemic, we went remote and we never went back.
Okay.
So we are a remote team today.
What's some advice you would give to sort of other founders on how to run everything smoothly there, with because your team is larger than 80 now? Is that right?
No, actually, it's smaller.
It's smaller?
Yeah, when we went through the pivot, sorry, I kind of alluded to that, but didn't hit the nail on the head. When we made that pivot, it also meant we were going to have to cut back on team size and on expenses while we figured out the new product and until the new product got traction. And so today, total, we're about 30 people. So it's actually quite a drastic difference. What's interesting, though, is we are finding are probably more productive today as a 30-person team than we were as an 80-person team. And that's not in any way anything negative about the people who are no longer at the company who were before. They're all fantastic people. It's, I think, a lot more about, one, learning how to work more efficiently in a remote first environment. And then secondly, it is about things like leveraging AI tools in our day-to-day work and just leveraging improved software, period, for greater efficiency in what we do, right? So we get more done with each hour of the day now. And it doesn't feel like the trick to scaling is necessarily number of people as much as maybe it once did. Now it feels it's a lot more about getting the right answer. Right. And once you get the right answer, you don't necessarily need as many people on a team in order for it to scale once it's in growth mode.
And the speed to find that answer is just so far enhanced with AI, tools like Exa and Perplexity and everything like that. Okay. Well, depending on what the team says, I guess, what's one of the biggest pain in the butts you've got right now, or bottlenecks that you're trying to solve?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And if you could just wave your magic wand to get it done.
Yeah, I think it is ultimately the pace of feedback, right? It's gotten faster, but at the end of the day, the feedback you really need is customer feedback, and customers are busy. Right. They're running their businesses. They themselves are wearing 15 different hats. A lot of our customers are founders or business owners, and they don't have one role. They have one role that encompasses many. And so actually getting to the point where you can get them to focus on your product, which fits into their day or their workflow at very specific times, and doing that at volume to get enough voices and enough feedback to then make decisions and move faster, that actually feels like the bottleneck sometimes, right? Because the actual software execution side has gotten so much faster, right? But just as you just said, you don't want to just build what you think and then find out people don't want it, right? And so it feels sometimes as if we go through these cycles of sprint, hurry up, build it, get it out, wait for feedback before you can then sprint on the next phase of something. And during that time, then you need to switch to a different project to keep momentum moving forward. And then it can be hard to switch back. And so it really managing the different pace there of being able to get real quality market feedback with the pace of development, that's a sticky challenge right now.
Any ideas on how you can speed that process up?
Oh, I wish I had the answer. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll get back to you. I might.
I mean, honestly,
All
that
right.
feels like a space that's ripe for innovation with new tools to help make that process faster. But the key there is it needs to be deep feedback and deep insight from someone actually trying to accomplish something with your tool. I think in the AI space, what's been difficult for a lot of upstarts is people will look at their tool and say, "Oh, this is really cool." And that's the feedback they get. And then that person never comes back and uses it again. And they have
Yeah.
no idea why, right? And so that can be really frustrating, especially in a world where so many new tools are popping up so often. And so there's always that shiny new tool somewhere else. And as a user, sometimes I look up and I'm like, oh, yeah, what happened to that company I heard about 6 months ago? It sounded like they were really onto something, but I've never gone back to see what they've done with it. Right. And so, that's a challenge right now. There's so much being thrown at business owners and at consumers so rapidly that it's hard for them to actually really focus on any given product.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise. Typically,
Yeah.
when I do that with a company, I look back, there's like, oh, they just got acquired and now they've just been merged into some, massive fund. And so that tool has just wrapped it up into another tool.
Yeah, that definitely happens too. I mean, the other interesting trend there that I've seen is the rise of micro acquisitions. And one thing that's pretty fascinating that I'm seeing is a very rapid cycle from new startup AI tool that someone builds, they start to get traction, maybe it gets some good press, and within 12 to 18 months, they've listed it for sale, right? And that's happening more and more frequently. And I think part of it, the fact that it's become such a prototype culture, that a lot of these tools really are prototypes in the market and they're not fully built out. They don't necessarily have the resources or teams to build them out more fully into complete products. And so the founders get to a point where they say, oh, wow, this is going to be a really heavy lift to get from successful prototype to successful scalable product. And so they're just, selling it. And I think in some cases, it's also just the hype cycle dies down really quickly and they say, okay, I better go ahead and exit this. Right.
Yeah, or they're just builders and they just love building new stuff.
That too. I mean,
It's more excited than actually running the thing.
yeah, that's a strong pull out there, right? There are
Yeah.
definitely a lot of people who love building, and it's a lot of fun to build 6 projects a year.
And then sell them all within that next year. Okay, Danny, let's do a quick lightning round. Whatever answers first comes to your mind. There's no right or wrong answer, but let's see how you go here, if you don't mind.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay, what's the favorite underrated growth channel right now?
Video.
Right. What's one thing you wish you'd built sooner?
Ooh, learning how to craft AI agents to make myself more efficient.
Like that one. What's the most surprising thing you've learned from your customers?
That I am wrong very often.
Very humble. Besides Tailwind, what's another tool that you absolutely must use every day?
That's actually a hard one. I feel like there are too many tools that I use every day. Honestly, for my particular role in the scale of the company, it's our business intelligence stack, which we're moving over to PostHog right now, and it's really good at helping get to insights.
Right. Yeah, I'd say for me, communicating with the team is massive. So it's a pretty boring answer and generic, but Slack. Shout out Slack.
Yep. That's fair.
Okay. If you had one piece of advice for other SaaS founders out there, what would that be?
Listen to the customer and follow their advice.
Love that. Okay. And before we wrap up the show, Danny, back to Tailwind. Who are you best serving right now? Who are your main ICPs and customers, and what are you looking to achieve in the next 2 to 3 years? I know it's hard in today's with AI and such a rapid pace, but yeah, I'd love to know.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the biggest segments are e-commerce sellers. So folks who are selling physical products as well as digital downloads and courses and things of that nature. Creators, which includes bloggers as well as creators on more video forward platforms. And then what we call service providers, but people who are providing services to consumers as opposed to businesses. So that's the photographer, the wedding planner, the interior designer, folks like that. Those are the main ICPs. In terms of where we're serving them today, the biggest area of strength for us continues to be Pinterest marketing, helping make it really easy to create the amount of content you need to in order to succeed on Pinterest and guiding people towards a strategy that makes sense, that's sustainable for them, that's going to be consistent so they can build results over time. That's our bread and butter. In terms of where we want to go from here, I think the main theme is being able to drive even more value for those same customers. So I think there's some work we could do there to help people discover effective strategies, discover untapped content needs and untapped content areas where they can experience growth in their business. Another area I think is continuing down the path of content creation, but helping helping people create richer content over time than what we do today. That's probably going to be a major theme. And I think, if anything, the internet will only move more in the direction of rich content because of AI, because it's going to bring down the barriers to entry and the cost of creation massively.
Right. Well, there we go. Thank you very much, Danny. This has been awesome. I appreciate you being so candid and opening up to talk about Tailwind. For anyone listening who wants to check out Tailwind, what's the best way, or what's the website that they should go to?
Yeah, we are tailwindapp.com. So TAILWINDAPP.com.
Alrighty. And if they want to connect with you on a personal level, I'm sure they can find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place to go. After that, I'd say Instagram.
Okay, awesome. Well, this has been the Scaleforward podcast. Danny, once again, thank you so much for joining us. If you like this, please share it with a founder or marketer who would get some value from this. And please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks again, Danny.
Yes, thank you very much.